Thanks for coming back and joining us. We're now up to Much Ado About Nothing, Act 2, wherein our heroes put the plan into action and make the world safe for new and existing C# applications.
Well, let's hear. Is anyone in here who wasn't here for the previous hour? There's a few. There's actually quite a few. So we should reintroduce ourselves.
Yes, we should.
Yes.
So you are.
I'm Mads Torgersen, and I am the lead designer for C#.
And I'm Bill Wagner. I create most of the documentation for C# on docs.microsoft.com to explain the wonderful things Mads and his team makes. And I did get one more Shakespeare pun while we were on break. John told me to tell you that there's nothing rotten in the state of Denmark.
Oh, thank you.
So, so we did have that going. So the things that we're trying to do, so Mads talked through a lot of the design and the justification of how this feature is being put into practice. What was the path to decide we really do need to fix this nullable reference problem? We really do need to introduce code and introduce idioms that we can use in our C# code from an existing language in order to move forward and be able to express our design intent for null. So the idea behind it is not that nulls are always, always bad, but rather that it should be an expression of our design. Does this thing never have null? Or should it sometimes be null and missing? So a lot of the things that we want to do as we're trying to write brand new code, there's two parts to the demos that we're going to do here, is I want to start a new app from scratch and start to add features to it and discuss through what my design would be now that we have nullable reference types, so that I can explicitly say, what did I mean by this? And express that in code so developers who come after me can go, oh, okay, this thing probably sometimes is missing and might not be there. This thing should always have a real value that I can use. So I want to ask myself two questions anytime I'm designing and creating classes. Should this variable be null? Or should this variable never be null? And that leads to some implementation details then. The compiler is going to enforce assignment if I say this should never be null. It's going to do that kind of flow analysis that Mads talked about, where if I create this variable, from the time it is constructed until the time it's disposed of, there's no way it can be null, at least observably null.
Almost no way.
Almost no way.
Except if you fall into one of the holes we talked about.
Right. So we'll try to avoid those holes. Mm-hmm. If, however, my design says this variable sometimes is missing and sometimes is null, then what the compiler should tell me is anytime I want to dereference that value, your design says this should be null or could be null. Therefore, before you dereference it, you have to somehow conditionally check, either with pattern matching to construct it into a new variable, some kind of if-then, some kind of other null check to ensure that it's not null. And with this greenfield development, I like John's questions earlier where we talked about the bang operator to say the compiler thinks this might be null, but I know better. And John asked, should I feel bad if I'm using it? In this application where I'm doing brand new development, I think I should feel bad if I'm using it. I should be able to construct my algorithms and express null correctly so that I'm using the new constructs in the language that help support me. And I should never have to convince the compiler I know better than it does. I think I should have idioms that I can work without that. Is that a good way, I think, to approach this new world?
I think you should definitely try harder when you're in a greenfield. And you should consider it a serious smell if you have to use the warning suppression operator all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd agree with that.
All right. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to create this new app, take about half of the time we have, put this in play, and see what we come up with. So what we're going to build is basically a simulation of a survey. So we're going to try to get some data back from people by asking them a series of questions, asking them different kinds of questions, logging their answers. And in order to get a good survey, what we want to do is make sure that we reach enough people to get a reasonably large sample set. Now, some of the things that are in our design, we can already just start to talk about and say, I don't expect they would ever be null. If I'm going to ask people questions, well, those questions should never be null. Because clearly, if I'm asking them a question, there should be some content there. And now let's start to think about the respondents. In order to be able to analyze the data correctly, I want to know which people have said, no, I refuse to answer any of the questions. Or for which questions someone may have said, I don't want to answer that. So I want to keep track of those missing values that come back. That sounds like null. That sounds like something could be missing here. So let's start to think about how I would put this together. So the practices that we're going to adopt. If it's one of those types where I've said, or one of those variables where I've said, you know what? I don't think this really ought to be null. Okay, I'm going to put that question mark anytime it could be missing. And I want to make sure that this compiles cleanly without any of the warnings. All right, so I've put in some of the code that isn't related to the null stuff in so that this takes a little bit less time. But we're going to start with a survey question. I have a question. I need to do some things with it. Well, one of the things I'm going to have to ask about in a question is, should be in the wrong demo. So watch me type is pretty null. All right, I want that one. So my question is going to have just a couple different things. I've got this question type. It's a yes/no question. It's going to be a number, or it's going to be some text. Okay, so that's a value type, so I have no problem there. And I'll just say type of question. Yeah. And then I'm also going to want to have that string that is the question.
And there's always going to be a question here, otherwise it's
Right.
really weird.
There's really no point. So I'm going to now put together then a constructor for this. Well, I need a type. Yeah.
So can I ask you a question? Do you have the nullable reference types feature turned on right now?
Do I have it turned on? Yes, I believe I already turned that on.
Uh-huh.
So right now, one of the first things I did when I did file new project is to go under my build tab, and we're going to set that to all configurations. And if I hit, I actually can't do it here. I have selected C#8 beta.
Mm-hmm.
And when we edit my project,
You have enabled it, yes. Okay.
Nullable context options.
Right.
So one problem with the doc, I wrote the doc that this tutorial is related to with preview 1. The switch was a little different. I will update that later this week. Nullable context option enabled, everything's turned on.
Yes.
So we've got that there.
And I think that when we ship for real, that's going to be the default for new projects. We want you to use nullable reference types, and we're going to subtly pressure you to do so by having it on by default.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing, because this was in preview, note I had to select 8.0. I couldn't leave it as default, even though I've got 8 on this machine. Since it's in preview, the default, which is latest major version, would still be 7, because this is preview. Mm-hmm. And latest minor version would be 7.3, this being preview. So I have to actually opt into 8.
Right.
So I do have that 8.0 set there.
For that, we do have it's a nice gesture where if you use one of the new features in syntax, instead of just saying, I don't understand what that means, it'll say, hey, it looks like you're using a C#8 feature. Do you want to upgrade to the beta? And it'll do it for you.
Mats, can I just clarify? So when you were saying it will be on by default, you mean as in if I create a new project, that tag will be in there by default. It's not that
Yes.
It will default to enabled if I don't have the tag at all.
I believe it's that the tag will be
What John is saying, for the benefit of the recording and the people in the back, is clarifying that not having the, if you don't have the tag, that'll continue to mean that it's not on. We're not going to change the default meaning of the program, but we will put the tag in and we'll make it enabled in the template for new projects.
Right. Yep.
You can go and remove it or disable it or whatever, and that will still mean the old thing.
Right, so you have either File New Project in Visual Studio or .NET New, from the command line.
We currently think there's no good reason not to have this feature on in new code. Right? Why would you not want to be told about where you're about to make a mistake, honestly? So we're going to bullishly turn it on for new projects, but we do realize that it's work with existing code, so that has to be something you opt into.
So I have a simple constructor there. I always like this feature, to make it simple, I'm just using tuple deconstruction and assignment to assign both fields at once.
I will say that I did realize when I was going through my demo this morning and trying out different things that the warnings don't always come up right when you use the tuple assignment. The nullable warnings don't actually work right with tuples yet in the preview. So, so eventually they will, but you might miss out on warnings if you use that.
Right.
But other than that, I'm a fan of it too.
Now, well, this is a small app, so right now it's just as one project. Imagine this were a library that I was going to let other people use. So I may ship this as a NuGet package. I may do some things to make it, so that other groups, other applications can plug this library in. So that means even though I've turned on enable nullable context, and I'm going to get warnings and errors, and the compiler is going to enforce that nothing in this project creates a survey question where the question is null, I can't guarantee that every user of my NuGet package is going to turn this on. They may have some existing code. They may be pulling it into a C#7 app. So, even though the compiler is going to help me, I'm still going to do some tests. I'm going to say, if string dot is null or white space, because we know string already has that kind of extra null thing, which I wouldn't like anyway, of question. Well, then I'm going to, next parentheses there, throw a new argument, null exception. In the interest of time, I won't type all the extra parameters to make a nice message and everything. But this is an important thing, I think, as I'm writing new code. I know I'm using C#8. I'm really happy. I like it. But the world isn't safe yet. Not everyone's turned it on. And we know that for our customers and for your customers, a lot of people are going to turn it on over time as they get to be able to use it. So even though you're turning it on, especially in public methods, I would really consider keeping the verifications in place even though the compiler is helping you. It's obvious with string because we could have someone pass the empty string, which is another way to say null, which would still be an error in this case because I'm still asking people nothing. But even with other types, I would put an appropriate check in place when you're initializing things at the public API level. Would you agree? Think I'm doing okay so far?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't know that your consumers are going to be turned on, have this feature turned on, then you have to trust but verify, right? You communicated to them that you didn't want nulls, but they may not have known that. They may have been in a language version that didn't pick up on that, or they may not have yet switched it on themselves.
Because I left all the other
You
code
can't
in.
trust
I'm
them.
going to quickly just grab the variable names from here to make sure I get the same names. Otherwise, I'm going to have to redo all kinds of stuff. All right. So that's a pretty simple type. And once again, I'm now very simply enforcing that result. If I tried to do something, the compiler would say something is wrong. I could simply, if I say, question equals null. Yep, I really did turn it on. I'm getting that warning there. Mm-hmm. Okay. If I try to sneak it in some other way. You guys are smart. Okay. All right, so we've got our question type in place. Mm-hmm. So now, the next thing I would need to build up on top of that is I need to build a full survey, which is a list of questions. Okay? So that's kind of in a survey run. So that's going to have a bunch of questions, a bunch of things, and then what it's going to have to do is start getting respondents and then try to start asking them, do you want to do this? Do you want to make this stuff happen?
Is it confusing to you that you have no question marks in your question type?
Yes. Just a little bit. All right. So start rolling through. Now, once we've got that, we're going to put some things into the survey run. Again, I'm just going to save some time typing. Hit the easy bake oven here. Because then I want to store a list of questions. Okay, my questions can never be null. So I didn't make it question mark. And then I'm going to be able to add a question to it. And I've got a couple different constructors here, either using the type and the question as two different elements, or just passing in that survey question object, right? So now I can add some things to it. Again, I haven't ran into where I want nulls yet, because this run, everything should be non-null. I feel like I'm doing okay. I feel like this is easy.
Good.
Stuff is non-null. I like that. All right. What else we got? All right, so I put that in. Now, let's go in and add a few questions. So we'll take this off. And if we had some people doing this, so I've got a couple different questions here. I've got a yes/no question. Has your code ever thrown a null reference exception? You know, how many times has that happened? And then for the third question, of course, we have, what is your favorite color? Nobody?
So the number, is that tied to a long?
It's probably an int. Hopefully people have learned over time. But if I were to try to add a question, all right, we should be able, compiler should be telling me that I'm misusing that API. Cool, I've got the little green squiggles there. I've got stuff underneath it. Right, anyway, I sneak this in, I should be able to get something there that says, nope, nope, you can't do that. Okay, nice. So now I've got some questions. Now what I want to do is I need to build up, in terms of that, to build some respondents, make some things going into place. So I'm going to grab a bunch of other code. And now, let's grab this one by one, because there's something slightly more interesting here. If I get into my survey responses, I've got some things that I made using a random number generator, because for a simulation, I'm just going to generate random answers. But to get my answers, I'm going to make a dictionary. And each respondent, I'm going to give them an ID. So I'm going to have an int for an ID, and I'm going to make it a string for the set of questions that they answered. And now this is going to be a nullable dictionary, because if a respondent says, I don't want to answer any of your questions at all, this collection is going to be null. They didn't answer any of the questions. Okay? And since this might be null, I'm just going to leave it uninitialized, because that's a handy default value. So if someone decides I don't want to respond, there we go. Their collection of the index into the answer, and an answer is going to be blank. Cool.
And so unlike what people are used to with events today, where they have to remember to check for null to see if there is a collection there, here they will be told if they forget.
Right. Yeah. So now I'm going to uncomment this to generate an answer. This is that simulation that's just going to return some defaults. And note that generate answer, now that does return a string question mark. So if we ask them the question, they go, nope, I'm not going to tell you my favorite color. I can default and say, no, I'm not going to do anything there. Okay, so, right. Cool, so now we've got those in place. Now let's look at the stuff that builds and cheats to answer a survey. So now to answer a survey, I'm going to pass in for the respondent, here's all my questions. So once again, that's going to be IEnumerable. It's a sequence of questions. There's no question marks here because I don't want any nulls coming in. Those are those questions. They can't be null. That would be good. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask if they consent to the survey. So do you want to take the survey at all? Or are you going to say, nope, nope, not at this time? And if they say no, well, I can simply just return. And now if they do decide they want to answer, I'm going to say, all right, so now I'm going to create that new dictionary for this person's answer. And for every question, I'm going to generate a response and then put it in place into the answers. Okay? So again, I've decided my design says you can either participate to the survey, and at this point the implementation is such that you would answer every question. I don't have it returning nulls there. But the API says we could extend it that way to say, nope, nope, I'm not answering that question. Mm-hmm. And if we reach a person or don't reach them at all and we say, nope, I don't want them to answer any of the questions at all, I don't participate, I'm not doing this, I'm slamming the phone down, we're done. Okay, so we got that going. All right, so once again, I've got this set up. It's going to get pulled in. Life is good. I feel pretty good. I do have to check when I generate an answer. Notice that could return a nullable string. So I have, before I add it, I check to see if that's there, right?
So if you didn't do that.
Yeah, if I take this null check away. Now.
You get a warning saying, hey.
I've said I'm only going to put it in my dictionary, which is why I chose a dictionary instead of a list. I'm only going to put it in there if they answered the question. If they didn't answer the question, don't put a null in there. Okay, cool. All right, so we've got that.
Cool. So it looks like you were, the feature was helping you here again.
The feature's helping me again. I put this in place. If I'm going to type it that way, it's not going to do it. All right, so the compiler's helping me, guiding me to make sure that I'm enforcing my design. All right, what else we got? What else we need to do here? Now, let's perform the survey. So when I run a survey, right. Okay, so my list of respondents, that's going to be, once again, could be null, because we don't actually do anything until later after constructing this object and working with it. Then I'm going to construct the list of respondents once I actually run the survey. So it's going to start out as null, and then eventually we'll do the run and make it happen. So I'm going to allow that thing to be null. And then here's the part that I find where, once again, it's helping me. I'm going to get a respondent, and if they answer the question, I'm going to add them into the list. Because it's respondent ID, if they answer the survey, we're definitely going to put it in place. But I am going to add those respondents, which is a real object now, even if they said no. Their answers are null, but because I want to track how many people answered, did they answer, I want that to be non-null. Because maybe in future versions, as we start adding more features to this, I'm keeping track of demographics for the people that did and didn't participate. I want to make sure there's no bias in here. Mm-hmm. So I do want to track who said no, at least some information about them, rather than just saying, nope, nope, they didn't answer, and we got 12 out of 100 people answering the survey. So I want to make sure I track that and put that in place.
A bit of a connection to this morning's keynote, isn't there?
Just a bit.
We're tracking everything we know about people who opted not to be tracked.
Now, when you put it that way, it sounds mean. But I'm only doing it for good.
That's right. This is obviously.
So we will assume that if you were consented to be contacted at some point to work with this, at least would be interested in some way to do this. All right. So what we have here now, what I've built, as we work back on this, is I put together this question. Okay, and I've said, all right, there's no way I should ever ask nothing. So the question, everything is non-nullable. One thing I like that you went over earlier this morning is this code looks like normal pre-C# 8 code.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see anything weird and different in my syntax. I could have written this years ago.
That's exactly right. I mean, you're free to use pattern matching and fancy stuff for this if you want, but we're tracking through the normal flow of code. We're tracking whether we think things can be null, so that you don't have to write things differently.
And now here, this is good. You know, when I look at the member variables I've added here, I can see some of those question marks in there. You know, they kind of stand out to me. It makes me think that, all right, so this is something different. You're now making me express something that before I'd have to look at everything inside the code and decide what did I expect, and what was the design here. So if I look at this and I say, you know, that survey responses, that's how we're going to track whether they did this or not. I don't have to have an extra Boolean variable to say, oh, you know, they did respond and this is here and so on. But I have a single place where I'm expressing that design intent, and then all the way through the rest of this, it's like, okay, so we know that someone may decide they don't want to do this. They may not want to respond at all. So I should be forced to check and see, is there something there?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel pretty good about this. I like that. Nice. Okay. And now if I walk through this, I'm saying once again, all right, so my questions have to be real. That's good. I'm adding questions. Okay, that's good. My respondents, I'm building the survey long before I actually execute the survey. So my list of respondents starts out as null. But at some point during the lifetime of this object, I'll run the survey, generate a lot of results, and only after that point in time would that member variable not be null. So it's only after that point in time that I can say, yep, this should definitely be true. All right, and in fact, I'm going to use that same idiom there where if this is null, that means we haven't run the survey yet. I could still add questions to it. Once that's non-null, I've already asked all the questions. It would probably be mathematically wrong and wrong from a data point to add questions. So if I were to expand this into more of a production code, these two add question overloads, I should check and see I actually want the respondents to be null.
Right.
Because I haven't run the survey yet, so we're still in that mode where we're building the survey. So it's expressing that intent better. Why don't I go ahead and just do that? So I would be if respondents doesn't equal null. That'd probably be an invalid operation exception because at this point I shouldn't be doing that because I've already asked the questions. I can't modify the survey now. We're not politicians or anything. You're not gonna. Sorry. Okay. So even just having these design idioms helps me look at the code and go, you know, I missed a different kind of error there because I'm using null to check the state here. I'm not actually checking null there, but the fact that if it is null, thank you.
You have an invalid operation.
Yes, I do. Good. Thanks. All right. So, you know, but even that idiom of being able to force myself to say, I know what null means, and I gave null a meaning to that field in this class that now says, if I should be checking for this or not checking for it, there's some reason in my design that says it should be there. So I feel pretty good. I like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this goes a little beyond what just the annotation forces you to, right? It's just that you put it in there and you made the intent clear that this can be null. And now when you read it later, you can see, oh, there was an intention here.
Right, there was an intention.
Yeah.
Since it was supposed to be null, I should check. All right, I feel good.
Yeah.
Great.
Bill?
Yes?
How much would you use that to drive the design and say, do you know what, I don't really like null as much, so the fact that I've seen that it might be null, hey, maybe I should have a new type of respondent survey or something.
So,
it becomes clearer.
right, so John just asked, now if I see this, if my design and if one of my overall design goals is I'd like to avoid null in a lot of places, would this make me look and think this might be a code smell? And maybe what I should do is I should split this into two classes, one of which is a survey design, and now once it's complete, pass that off to run a survey and get the responses and put it into two different objects. That's also a valid design that we just don't have time for. But it does. And again, I think one of the big keys in everything we're trying to do with the language and what Mads and his teams does is when I write code, I want that to be as expressive as possible and to explain to everyone who reads my code later, this is what I intended from this. And from that, this does help us possibly even continue to improve it and to continue to see ways where this design might not be exactly what you want. There were some shortcuts here. It was 3 in the morning. I just hit bang, whatever it was. And you can see that the language and the tools hopefully helps to guide us to better code. And certainly helps to guide us to code that when others read it, it's obvious what we were thinking or not thinking.
I guess it links to the previous question, how bad do you feel when you put the question mark? Well, now.
The question is, do I feel bad if I put the question mark? As I've been using this, I don't feel bad if I put the question mark if I thought about it. If I thought about why it should be null. In the same way, and a good analogy here is with nullable value types. There are times when I would say the overwhelming amount of time I use a value type, it's not a nullable value type. But when my design says this value might be missing, and I'm explicit that this value might be missing, then I put the question mark there, and it does make everything else flow much more smoothly. As Matt said kind of in the first thing, and this is where I think I'm starting to get the hang of this. I feel good now. That if I don't want to redesign a missing feature, right? If you go back to, and if we try to think of like I've got integers, how do I express there is no value? Well, 0. But what if 0 was a valid value? Well, it's got to be a nullable int, or I have to carry along an extra bool or something to say this wasn't initialized and it's real. So if my design really does mean this value might be missing, and that's what I meant, like Mads' example with the middle name, or this example here with, we haven't run the survey yet, so it's a very valid state for this object to be in. I don't feel bad at all putting the question mark there. As long as I thought about it and I said, yes, this is what I meant, and I think that what I meant expresses my design correctly, I feel pretty good.
If anything, you should feel better about depending on null now than before, because before whenever you depended on null in your semantics, you risk other people not realizing that was part of the semantics and they forget to check.
It may force me also to make a better, a more expressive design as well, so I can introduce a variable
Yes.
that may express the file that actually there.
Mm-hmm.
Can be now or non-exist.
Right.
Right. So now let's look at,
What was that?
Could you repeat that?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it helps, essentially the point is it helps you express the model better, and it actually makes you feel better about the nulls as well, right? That you're not tripping somebody else up. We do call the feature nullable reference types. We don't call it non-nullable reference types.
Yeah. All right, so, and in terms of that, let's look at, as we start to add onto this, so now I want to try to add the code so that I could run these surveys, generate a bunch of answers, and then print that value out. So if I look at, there's a couple things now I'm going to use null just as my logic, because like I said, I said I know what I wanted to do. I expressly, then I can add this Boolean property, answered the survey, and I'll just implement that by saying the survey responses doesn't equal null. Cool. Because I want that to say, all right, so did I answer this or not? Cool. I can get an answer for any particular question. And here, I didn't want to redefine null, but I want to be able to print out that someone didn't answer the question. So I didn't make that a string question mark, because think of if I were doing an enterprise app with some kind of layering, this would be something I would intend to print out or to display, and I want to explicitly go, this person refused to answer this question. So I didn't want to just leave it blank, but I used GetValue or default on that dictionary, because my dictionary class int string would return null if I pass in an integer where there's no answer. So if they didn't answer that question, my default would be null. I said I don't want to return that, so now I'm forced to say this would be no answer. Now this is an interesting question I want to ask you, especially as we get further into this and we start working with migrating an existing application. this dictionary class, that's in our basic library, and there's no annotations there.
Right.
So if I just put, get value or default here, that says it returns a string, but the default there, that actually could be returning null, and it's in our framework stuff.
Yes.
And I'm not getting help right now.
Right. So there's a whole thing about what about existing code out there? What about existing code that was not annotated and so on? So we decided we're not going to go look at somebody else's code and reinterpret it to mean, oh, it's all non-null. Right? That would be wrong. They didn't omit the question marks because it was all non-null. They omitted the question marks because they couldn't put them in. Right? It wasn't in their language when they wrote it. And so we have to distinguish between assemblies that were intentionally leaving out, or modules or whatever, that were intentionally leaving out question marks versus ones that couldn't express nullability. Right? And the way we distinguish it is that if you have the feature on, we put an extra attribute in there saying all omitted question marks are non-null. Like it's an extra attribute we can recognize, okay, this was compiled by a newer compiler and they intended for all these to be non-null. And so when we use an old library or something that doesn't have it in, then we don't produce warnings out of that because we didn't know what the intent was. So we kind of just go with the flow and say, presumably I'm using it right. It's no worse than before, right? Because if we try to guess about their intent, or the compiler tried to guess about it, it will be wrong, right?
So it's almost like you're oblivious.
Yes, and we do use the term oblivious, null oblivious for that kind of pre-nullability code, and so right now in the preview the core libraries are oblivious. We haven't annotated them yet. We will one way or another. I mean, we might just go and fix up the whole code base, but we are actually talking about another way of doing it because you don't always have access to the code base, or you're not always the person who owns the code base, but you want nullable annotations. So we're thinking about a format where you can sort of put annotations on the side, like a little sidecar file format that you can give annotations for somebody else's library. So one way or another, we will.
So from my standpoint as a developer starting to use this, I think what I'm hearing is certainly experiment with the preview, and I'm getting excited. I like this. And when this comes out, I'll have annotations on .NET Core App and Framework and our stuff.
That's the plan, yeah.
I also use a lot of NuGet packages. Some of those I'm hoping are going to move forward and release close to when C# 8 releases and have those packages with it. But for those that don't, if I know what the semantics are supposed to be and how I'm using it, I can create some text file on the side, and then something like this, where GetValueDefault could be returning a string, or I mean it could be returning a null.
Null.
I would probably have to do something like I did here. Just even though I don't get the warning, I put the bang there, right? Because this library right now it's not annotated, so it could have been returning a null.
Yeah. So right now it's not making you put the bang.
Right.
Well, so yeah, you probably, yeah.
Right. And then once I've annotated that, I'll get a warning here. Or I shouldn't get a warning because it's no longer oblivious. It would actually know what's going on, what's happening. Awesome.
You may want to rat hole this, but how would you even annotate GetValueDefault? Because that's going to return a t-value. And
right.
if t-value is a non-nullable value type, it's going to return a non-null value. You can't put t question mark as what it returns, so what can you do?
Yeah, so he's asking what could GetValueDefault actually do? How would it be annotated? And it's one of those places where having one of the special attributes that we would likely provide for methods that have special null behavior would apply. GetValueDefault would be annotated as a method that might return null even if the element type is a non-nullable element type.
Okay, so the return type would still be t.
The return type would be t, but the compiler would also be able to see the attribute and say, oh, in in this case here, where you've instantiated it with string, the return type would be string question mark. So you can say, oh, add nullability, even if it wasn't there.
Right. So I've got,
On line 39, shouldn't the return value string question mark now?
right there? No, I specifically wanted a string because I said on GetValueDefault I provided a non-null default. So, right, so I want to print out no answer. No, that's a good question. And this is one of those things where the compiler can't tell for sure because the signature, as Mads and John were just kind of going on, the signature of the method says this could be null.
Well, actually, you're using the overload where you provide the default.
Right.
So this one would just return string. But the one that doesn't have the second argument, that one would be special and return a nullable string, even on a dictionary of non-null strings. Yeah.
All right, so then if we,
One more question about line 39.
Uh-huh.
back in here. Boom. Nope, back.
Survey responses. Maybe null in this case.
Survey
Yes.
It's an extension method which presumably handles null input by assuming that's equivalent to a missing key.
Good point. I should be getting an error right there.
He's saying, why don't you have to?
That is a good question. I dotted into my survey responses and I'm not getting a warning there.
That's odd.
It's an
Yeah.
extension method. So it may be fine to be.
Is it an extension method?
Oh, yeah, the overload is.
Oh, yes, it's an extension method, and it's in an assembly that's not annotated, so it's not giving you the warning that it otherwise would.
Very good catch.
That's, yeah. It does get a little confusing when you're in this mixed world, and some of the code has, post-nullability semantics, and some has pre-nullability semantics. You're like, why didn't I get a warning? Why did I get a warning? But yeah, hopefully we'll all be in the post-nullable world in a couple of years' time.
Right. Indeedy. All right, so make sure we get to migrate some code too. So add these in. We've got a couple small, quick methods. Let me just add that assembly. There we go. So, and here I can use the semantics of null to then, if I want to, hide it in my API. So if I want to get all participants of a survey, I can do respondents question mark or enumerable.empty. So I can, instead of returning null, I can return the empty sequence. So someone could iterate over this without crashing. And if there's nothing there, there's nothing there.
Right. Question is another one of those null-related operators that's correct by construction. Right? It will always give you, if you have a non-nullable value on the right-hand side, it will always give you a non-null value.
And then I'll take that off. And then to run the survey, I then go through after I've added the questions. I just look at all the participants. And I'll say perform survey. So I want to run this until I get 30 people or 50 people that said yes. And that code simply walks through here and just keeps going, well, it's less than the number of people I wanted. Keep asking for more. So the dictionary may have more than 50 in it, but I got 50 people to say yes. And then we can go through and we can answer any of the questions. And if they chose not to, we get no response.
Okay.
Okay, I feel like this is, while small, this did give me a good feel for writing in this new world. I think.
And so the ultimate test would be to actually run it and see if you got no reference exceptions. And if not, then it worked for you.
I feel pretty good. As we try. Boom. There we go. There we go. Hey, so far so good.
Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
No errors. All right.
So essentially your takeaway is that when this is just part of your toolbox, then it's not invasive and it's not unnatural to just embrace annotating things and handling the warnings you get.
Right. And when I start writing something, If I forget to say, oh, I intend this to be null, and I forget the question mark, I start getting some warnings, and I have to declare what I meant. I think that's pretty good. So now let's look at something different. I want to go and look at a project that already existed. Boom. And now this is small, and we only have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to we're going to pretend a little bit. This is actually a reasonably small ASP.NET web app with some tests. You can feed it an RSS feed, and it's going to show you the headline of a lot of recent articles on that blog. And right now, if I edit its project file, I don't have any of the stuff in here. So I'm going to turn on C# 8. And what I would probably do when I first started migrating, don't know why I did that twice, but okay. I really wanted those new features. I'll put that nullable context option, right?
Yeah, something like that.
You have no idea how much.
We just changed it. I'll look it up.
Yeah. It changed.
Options with an S. Did you get that?
Nope, I probably have a single one. Yes.
There really needs to be an ID gesture for this.
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go. And then I would do a build. And then I would probably get a number of errors. This one, again, small-ish program, in part because I will be using this for a tutorial to walk through how would I go about doing this on an existing app. And I'm going to get a set of warnings. Something this size, I'd probably just leave those warnings on and just fix them. Because to go through all of these, it's probably going to take me a couple hours. But I think what's important to learn is you don't have to do that, because I am sure your production code bases are bigger than the sample, right? So I'm just going to turn that off for right now. But what I know I want to do is I want to look at some of the things that I've created and say, I think it's worthwhile to look at some of these and say, what would I do? So let's start just right here. I've got this view model. Okay. I would like to make this a non-null thing. Actually, I think I want to start with a different one. I want to start with my service. Is that the one? Bang, bang, bang. Yeah. Which one did I want to start with? Because there were two I really wanted to make sure we showed. Yes, I'm going to start with my error model. I have no idea. Oh, I went ahead and ran it. Thanks. Fine.
Okay, it actually works.
Yeah.
Well, all good then.
All right, so we're good. So if you look at this, what we see is I've got this error model, and I've got a show request ID, and I've got some is null or empty there. So I want to just turn on, and this is still nullable, enable.
Wow.
Wow. There we go. So I turn this on. I now get about 3 or 4 warnings. So I can do this on a file-by-file or class-by-class basis.
Yes, we haven't shown this, but there's a directive you can put in your file and turn it on for just as much of your source code as you want to.
Right. If I had multiple classes here, I could put the directive on right here. And then I could turn it off again here. Right? So I could just scope it just to what I want. So I'm just working on this. Most of our samples don't have 2 or 3 different classes in one, but I have it here. Okay, so this is good. So I've got these things. Now, if I look at this, I'm going, all right, so
You're getting a warning.
I'm getting some warnings. And now if I look at this class, because it's small, I can see that there's a semantics to it that says, it looks like they were trying to do nullable things in kind of a different way. I've got this show request ID, which says, if this request ID, which is a string, if that's null or empty, that should return false. Otherwise, do this. Well, I mean, that feels like null belongs here. Right?
Yeah.
So
Feels like that could be null. Yeah.
that could be null. So I think I should do this.
Right. Just to be clear, what was the warning?
What the warning was.
You can hover on it when it shows up again.
Yeah.
On the
Yeah,
class.
On the class itself. Non-nullable property request ID is uninitialized.
Yes.
So
So that's the same warning we saw in the constructor before, but this one has a default constructor, so there's no way to place it, so it goes on the class instead.
Cool. Okay, so now I want to look at another one. So this one here, I definitely would just make a go bang. Now, everything's good. That's pretty much what I want there, because it looks like we've got some other semantics to test for null or empty.
Right.
I want to redefine null or force empty string or something in there, because that just...
You're not getting any warnings when you put the question mark on, so apparently your logic here is good.
Yep. Error text is still...
But you might have warnings show up elsewhere, but you would sort of like then just walk through them and deal with the warnings that you get from now consuming the thing that is now null.
Now, let's look in one of our others. The other one I really wanted to look at, because we get a few fun bits, is... Yeah. Yeah. If I look at my view model that comes back with my news story, here I actually have to look at a few interesting bits to do something different. So if I turn it on here, okay, so now I'm starting to get those same warnings. I have this uninitialized stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
I think I feel bad about this. Because right now, what I know about this program is this view model is going to get passed to a page, and then it's going to display those things. So it probably shouldn't be null.
Right.
So maybe I want to do something different. But if I look at where it's initialized, is in my service that initializes these stories. Here's something kind of interesting. I'm using Automapper, which is a NuGet package that can initialize these objects by setting properties of the same name from the structure that comes in between the two objects. So I'm going to get this syndication item ID, which is something that I'm going to read and deconstruct from the XML that comes back from an RSS feed. And amazingly enough, because Automapper works reasonably well, these property names map to the things that come in here, except for the URI. So I have the Automapper set something up to change this. Okay, so now what I know, because if I look above from the new service where I'm going to actually instantiate this and make it work, is when I go get a news story and I create one, my news story is going to be created by mapping the item I got back from XML into this structure. So by looking at some other places in my design, I can make a really quick fix so that I could turn on Nullable everywhere and say this whole project is now safe. But I'm going to have to do something that, as John put, I'm going to feel slightly dirty about. Is I'm going to say this equals null bang. I'm going to say this equals null.
But that one is a value type, the first one.
So I don't need to do that one.
You actually don't get to.
And this equals null bang.
You have to remove the semicolon as well, I'm sorry, on the first one.
Thank you.
So essentially you're saying, well, these things, so this is a case we've talked about a little. These things are initialized by other means. And the only way currently in the prototype and feature as envisioned that you can express that is to explicitly initialize them to null bang, which says don't warn. Make them null, but don't warn. And we're still sort of like wondering whether that's the right thing to do. But so the recommendation is whenever you put in a bang, you should put in a comment saying why that bang is there, and you just did.
Now, with more time, because we've only got 5 minutes left, I could change the Automapper mapping to call a constructor, make this a read-only model, and do that, which is exactly what I would do. Yes, I see the yes, don't do this.
Yeah, so there's a quick fix here, and
Right.
there's the actual fix.
But there's a couple different things in that. One, depending on how deeply ingrained into your code some of this is, this may be the right thing for some migration. Because there are instances where I may go, you know, I do know better, but I really ought to be able to justify it. And here, once again, if I had another 20 minutes of demo and nobody wanted lunch, I would write that extra code. But since I don't, I'm going to do this right now and say, you know, to do, fix this.
Yes.
Ship it. No, check it in. We're good. Yes, John.
One suggestion that you put, to do brackets nullable, fix this so you can find them really easily.
That is a very good idea. To do, bang, nullable. There. So now I can find those and I can make a slightly better fix, depending on how big of the scope the problem is. And again, if I'm looking at this from the standpoint of what code would I write today, I would not do this. I would start by writing this as an immutable type. I would start by creating the Automapper to do it the other way, using a constructor and mapping to the constructor arguments. I don't have that right now. I mean, I already have this code that was written before these features were available. As Matt said in the first part, we didn't have correct by construction everywhere through the language for everything we did. So we used other idioms to express, yes, this is going to be null, but only for a little while, and then it's fine. So now we're going to express it explicitly here to say, yes, I know this is null, but only for a little bit. Let's not worry about it, because we know we've tested this and we know there's other means around it. So I have a way to move forward, which I feel good about. And now I can continue to convert more of my code. I can add more, and eventually I would reach this point where I would turn on that nullable context enable switch everywhere and say, now I should feel clean and I should stay that way. And then even with this, where these to-dos might still be here, anyway I now do go ahead and fix this, I would then say, all right, when I fix this, I have to leave the nullable context on and make sure that I fix it in a way that that continues. So I can do this in multiple steps, depending on the size of my code base and depending on how far-reaching any of the problems are.
There's actually a little trick here. If you, so you said nullable enable on top, and then you said nullable disable at the bottom.
Right.
And if you accidentally leave some of those in, then even though you turn it on project-wide, the nullable disable is going to turn it off. So what you can say instead is nullable restore.
Nullable restore.
And then it'll return it to project settings. And then once you flip it on for the whole project, that's just going to be a no-op. And both of them are going to be a no-op.
That's a great trick. Yes. And then another one that has a similar one that I believe is in.
That's it. There's a quick question down here.
Yes.
So it's featured available in C#8, so the SDK is 3.x preview, I guess. So if we want to be proactive and begin to fix code without the syntax, in the CI and likely because we have tons of repository, we have to restore in 3.x, changing the values, output the warning, and go back to the standard bit by reswapping the SDK for production build. Or can we stay on something stable on 2.x to have this feature?
You mean these pound nullable things?
Yes, I want to be proactive now and beginning to fix what can be fixed without the bang with the question mark. If I want to
I think I understand. So if I want to try this and see if I want to fix something now without turning this on, I can't use C#8 and ship something right now, but I want to get told when I'm doing something that could be wrong. Well,
what I'm trying to achieve is doing that on the CI on nightly because
right.
say, oh, install the so
I think what you're getting toward is wanting to do something like that, right?
yes, but they still have to do some preview to work, and the CI will have to build a preview, right?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear, but
The main issue is about the SDK itself. It's only available for the 3.x,
Mhm.
not until
that's definitely, yes.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's so it is a problem that you. I think we're trying to also ship the SDK in a preview version that also embraces the new language features. did we just do that?
Yes,
Or
there is-
I think we
yes,
did.
yes.
So you can actually, there is actually, the SDK also has the ability to run the C# 8.0 features now. The preview SDK can run the preview language features. It can compile against that. So if you're willing to adopt the preview SDK into your toolchain, you can do it. Otherwise, there's no way, right? I mean, you're using an old compiler against syntax it doesn't know. So that's the best we can do.
And for a CI build, you could set up a separate CI server just to check for these errors that you don't put into production. I realize that's not a great answer.
Well, this problem is he's going to have syntax in there that the production.
Well, now, if I turn on just warnings, right?
Well, he's still going to have question marks and stuff, right? So.
Okay, doesn't the warnings mode just turn on the checks?
It's just like Sonar Analyzer does. So an idea we have to have something running, so it does not touch your build and something can go to production. But you see output metrics and you say, so this is the thing you can fix before being in C# 8 because it's still preview.
Right.
But I just analyze the code and based on the fact you're on C# 7 point something, here is everything you can fix right now.
Right, that's possible, yeah. There's like a subset of things you could already fix, as long as you don't need to put question marks in your code or something that you could actually discover some nullability errors even ahead of time, yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
And there was one other one that I wanted to spot quick.
We're over time and they're hungry.
We are, yes. So I will skip that. So we did that. Big things that I want to look at in terms of the kinds of things that we're looking at. When you turn it on an existing code base, these are probably the most common errors, warnings that you're going to see, right? Converting a null literal to a non-nullable. You can't do that. Null nullable, not initialized. That was one of the ones that we saw. Reference assignment, reference receiver would mean this could be null. In a method call, null reference return, I'm returning null when I shouldn't. Null reference argument. Those are the most common ones you'll get. You're going to see some others as well. And the big things that we want to get out of trying to work with this in terms of converting code is turn it on small blocks, class at a time, method at a time, and so on, depending on the scope of different things. And look for the design intent. And when you fix them, as Matt said in the first session, don't redefine null to be some other value, like the empty string. Actually think about it and go, yeah, this null's okay here, and put in the question marks. Or null's not okay, try to refactor the code such that it never can have the value null. So when null values are part of your design intent, that's good. Design intent's obscured, try to change what happens. Right now, interestingly, var declarations will always default to non-nullable. So if I do var s equals some text, that's going to be a non-nullable string once you're in C# 8. And the boundaries with code generation in older libraries, we kind of alluded to that. There will be a sidecar format. There will be something where as any of the libraries that you depend on get converted or get the sidecar format added, the semantics should be there. With this last demo, I'm going to be working on a tutorial for docs that should go live within a week or so, where I'll go through more of the examples in terms of what we did migrating. And there we go. I think that hits most of it. Last little bit, since everyone here is interested in C#, the .NET Foundation has now become an open membership organization. We want the community members to feel a strong stake in the future of .NET. So if you look at netfoundation.org/become a member, this is hopefully good justification to join the .NET Foundation. And if so, then there's a link to the forum to say, have you contributed anything to any .NET org repo? So whether that's our docs, Roslyn, C# Lang, pull request, enough issues, great discussion, whatever, and we will look at that. And if you are interested in becoming a member as an individual or as corporations, we're actively encouraging that. And as part of that, what you'll find on this page is everything about what we intend members' participation to look like, and at least the things that we're driving toward for that. Question? And with that, I think we're done. We can have lunch. Mads and I will answer
I
questions.
have a quick suggestion. You all want to go and get lunch, and maybe you have questions, but if you hang back here, everyone else will get lunch first before you. Why don't you and I go to the
Second floor.
second floor and hang out there, and then once you've got your lunch, if you have any questions, come and find us there and come and have a chat. And
Try to be at one of the big round tables.
We'll hang around in sort of the open area there and take questions there. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.